And commissioners, Lauren, are you with us? So, and you can hear us okay? Oh, okay. Let's begin. We're going to have our legislative update next, and then we're going to follow that with the rules, action on the rules changes. So Kyle, thank you for being with us and your flexibility on time this morning. Kyle, take it away.
Certainly, Chair Cross and Commissioners. Kyle Thomas, Director of Legislative Policy Affairs for the HECC. We're slated on the agenda for a review of the 2022 legislative session summary. I will not be able to deliver that full written document to you today, unfortunately, as I've been out of the office for the better part of 6 weeks owing to long COVID. That summary will be completed at some point, but the timeline is uncertain. But here's the highlight. The 2022 short session saw a significant influx of new investment to HECC for workforce and financial aid of the type that one would more usually expect to see in a long legislative session. The biggest investment, the $200 million Future Ready Oregon package targeting workforce opportunity primarily for certain priority populations in technology, healthcare, and manufacturing, was signed by the governor in mid-March. The first round of formula funds and the first application round for competitive funds will be issued and opened this spring, with many more opportunities to follow as we onboard the additional staff required to implement the programs contained in the package. Implementation of the package is not just a priority of HECC and the governor, but also the Racial Justice Council. And we are expected to and will happily engage in what will be some of the most collaboration over programming agency history. In addition to this package, which I'm not going over in detail because the Commission has heard presentations in the past, the agency used an emergency board reservation for a new financial aid program. I'm being told I'm cutting out a little bit. Thumbs up if you can hear me. Thank you. So in addition to this package, the agency received an emergency board reservation for a new financial aid program to support Oregon tribal students. And that is registered members of federally recognized Oregon tribes. This $19 million allocation, which HECC will work to secure from the emergency board at that board's next meeting, is expected to nearly eliminate the costs of attendance for qualifying tribal students in the 22-23 academic year, provided that they attend an Oregon public institution. You'll be asked to approve these rules in just a moment, which lay out the program parameters for the most robust financial aid program available to any student population in Oregon today. With this investment, Oregon tribal students will receive coverage of cost of attendance at the undergraduate and the graduate level if they attend a public institution, and a subsidy equaling the public institution cost equivalent if they decide to attend, instead of a public, they decide to attend an Oregon private institution. And Bob Small will join me in a moment to give you a deeper point-by-point of the program that we've developed, and together he and I can answer any questions that you may have about the finer structure of the program. Even though we do not have the funding in hand yet, staff have created materials and processes, and we do expect to open the application period for the program soon, even as we await the final approval from the emergency board that would be required before staff could actually disperse funds to students. This investment is not without its challenges, namely it's not considered a current service level investment. While no program is really truly guaranteed to be carried over into the next budget cycle, if the Commission wants to see this program continue, it will need to introduce a policy option package along with corresponding legislative language in the 2023 legislative session, or otherwise work with legislators to enshrine the program permanently into law. Or we do risk the fact that we would have to cut students off of the financial aid program after only 1 year of their program of study. The last major policy item that we secured in the past session was alterations to the Oregon Promise program that will allow more program dollars to flow to the lowest income students on the program, and that open the program up to more aspiring community college students. So the 2022-23 version of the program will see the elimination of the $50 per term copay that all students were required to pay, the doubling of the minimum award amount from $1,000 per year to $2,000 per year, and the automatic indexing of that minimum award amount to the increase in the average community college tuition rate year over year. And the lowering of the GPA requirement on program entry from 2.5 to 2.0. And while I know the commission and some commissioners do prefer the elimination of the GPA requirement, these changes were made within the current level of program appropriations. Eliminating the GPA requirement at this stage would have required additional appropriations and potentially jeopardized our ability to secure any changes at all. The bill also eliminates the first year experience requirement for students to be entitled to award renewal. The legislature funded this requirement in the first budget year when the Oregon Promise was implemented, but did not fund these experiences in subsequent years, and many community colleges ceased offering those programs. There were several other changes passed in a couple of omnibus education bills introduced this session. I'll mention those briefly. Senate Bill 1572 attempts to allow adjunct faculty to more easily qualify for federal student loan forgiveness by creating a calculation for their work hours that recognizes the hours of work that they put in outside of the classroom and requires colleges to calculate their full-time status solely for public loan forgiveness purposes, according to the calculation that's specified in the legislation. That bill also corrects a critical process issue arising from the Transfer Council, wherein the structure and membership of the council subcommittees required committees of faculty and only faculty to work on and craft recommendations for policies that would more sensibly be determined by folks like registrars, advisors, or other professional staff. So this change allows subcommittee membership to meet the needs of the purview of each subcommittee, but does protect faculty prerogatives on issues of curriculum and instruction. Even under the change, only faculty will be allowed to craft recommendations to the Transfer Council on those types of issues. Senate Bill 1522 makes one small additional change to the Transfer Council by allowing a teacher employed by an education service district to serve in the high school teacher slot if they are so appointed. And that bill also makes an accommodation to the 2021 legislation requiring that menstrual products be available on campus. And that accommodation provides the commission more flexibility to determine which spaces on campus are required to have these products available. That original legislation passed last year requires agency rules, and staff have finalized those recommendations, which will appear on your May commission agenda. All in all, this was a very positive session for aspiring Oregon workers and learners. And while this implementation work is ongoing, work to develop the 23-25 policy and budget options is also underway. Staff will submit a list of placeholder concepts tomorrow to DAS, the Department of Administrative Services, while we work internally and externally to build those out. And you can expect to hear increasing detail about these concepts beginning at your next meeting and continuing to your potential approval of them for in the late fall prior to final submission to the governor's office for consideration and potential introduction in the next legislative session. And yet still, while we're doing this work, which involves socialization and invitation to participate in discussion to many groups with whom we have either never engaged or only superficially engaged with before, we are active in the planning of, as well as attending and participating in the meetings of the task force on underrepresented student success, which held its first site visit meetings at the end of last month at Portland State University and at Mount Hood Community College. At the next task force meeting, staff will present on college access challenges and potential solutions, excluding the affordability challenge, which will have its own dedicated separate task force meeting and presentation. The task force has a necessary, ambitious, and overdue scope of work. And because of the remarkably high levels of political uncertainty this electoral cycle, we don't know where this work will end. It's also a parallel process to our own policy and legislative concept development processes. And I expect that some of the recommendations from these processes will converge at some point. And that's almost certainly a positive thing, as it would represent alignment between the commission and an engaged group of legislators about what the highest priority policy and budget items in the 2023 legislative session will be. That concludes my update. I'm happy to answer questions or be joined by Bob Small in a moment for discussion of the rules.
Any questions for Kyle? Well, Kyle, we're glad to see you up and about, and wish you a speedy recovery. And this has been an incredible period of time for the legislative work. So we send you our best thoughts here. Your recovery, as well as continuing this excellent work that you've been able to do over the last several months, despite this long COVID experience. Anyone else? Any comments or thoughts before we move to the rules? All right, let's move to our discussion about the item on our agenda, 12.1 and 12.2. Which one do you want to take first? 12.1?
Well, I think we'll do the Oregon Tribal Student Grant Rules first.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Chair Cross, Commissioners, thank you very much. For the record, my name is Bob Small. I'm the Policy Advisor for the Office of Student Access and Completion. And I'm going to be going over docket item 12.2, which is the Oregon Tribal Student Grant Rules. So with that, the Tribal Grant Program was established by House Bill 5202A and basically establishes the authority for the HECC to develop a grant program for Oregon, federally recognized Oregon tribal members. And just a quick overview for each of the rules. Given to you in your package, the section 0001 is the definitions. Most of these definitions are adopted from other grant programs, but there are some specific ones in there which are completely applicable to the Oregon Tribal Student Grant, which goes down in, you see in section 9, where student, this means an individual who meets the Oregon Tribal Student Grant Program eligibility requirements and enrolls at an eligible institution at resident requirement outlined by the statute, or excuse me, rule 030005- or section 1FB. And these going into that, into the student eligibility, which is the important part established for this particular program. So the purpose of the Oregon Tribal Student Grant is for the Commission to provide grants to offset the cost of attendance to any qualified student who meets the following criteria. And the main criteria is that the student has to be an enrolled member of the Oregon federally recognized tribe as defined by Oregon Revised Statute 182.162. The rest of the eligibility requirements follows along the lines of most of our grant programs, but they have to have submitted a Fafsa or federal student aid and Oregon-based ORSA. They have to accept any state and federal educational grants, which puts this into the category of last pay, but the restrictions of this are raised to the cost of attendance instead of tuition and fees only. So at the undergraduate level, we are looking at anyone who attends an Oregon Public University, OHSU, Oregon Community College. The Commission will supply an award equal to, but not to exceed, the average cost of attendance for the institution that the student is going to. And reductions of that grant are based on federal and state educational grants, scholarships, and any other types of awards that are not exempt by Title IV funding regulations. Moving on, we will also be addressing students who are attending grad school into the master's program. And with that, the commission shall provide an award equal to the average cost of attendance, reduced again by institutional aid, state and federal educational grants, and scholarships available to each student. And again, the grant will not exceed the highest average undergraduate cost of attendance at an Oregon public university listed in the Oregon statutes. And the total award again will not exceed the total cost of attendance. We are basing this on priority. Once students at the undergrad and master degree programs are awarded, and if there are sufficient funds, which again is determined by the commission, we may be able to award into professional degrees and doctoral degrees. And again, the basis is based on reduction of any federal, state, institutional aid, and will not exceed the highest undergraduate cost of attendance at an Oregon public university. And there are exemptions that are recognized that will not be counted against this grant. Number one would be grants and scholarships awarded by the Oregon federally recognized tribes. Again, we work closely with the Oregon tribal members on developing these rules, and this is one thing that we all agreed on that would be applicable to these students. Other educational funding, which would be exempt, would be any educational benefits provided by the Department of Veteran Affairs, which would be your GI Bill benefits. And again, any other federally excluded educational grants would not be counted against this student grant program. If there is issues in the future where there's limited funding, the commission will be able to use an alternate methodology as determined, and available funding will be set at or below the commission determines as necessary to allow the commission to operate this grant fully. And again, also, if there is additional funding, the commission can go ahead and determine the awarding amount as well. And we also have a disbursement advance, which is basically the same as determined by our other state grants. Do have a section in here that allows us to make late disbursements or retroactive awards determined after we have the eligibility. The application process, excuse me for jumping around a little bit, but the application process, we have been working closely with the tribes. So again, we are working out the fine details on this, how we are going to determine the proper eligibility with Oregon tribes. One thing is that we are developing a document which the student will be able to provide to the tribal education office and have it endorsed there, and then that would be one of our determinations on determining the student's eligibility. With that, that is just a very brief summary. Again, Kyle covered more of the legislative details on that, but I will be open to any questions or concerns.
Mr. Chair, if I can just add something very, very quickly that Bob sort of said in passing, and I think Lindsay was clear on this, but I just want to make sure it is clear. This is sort of a little bit different than much of the financial aid work that we do. I think the governor very much considers these dollars to be the tribe's dollars. And so I want to make sure that that commissioners are aware that we engaged extensively over the course of several weeks with the tribal education cluster in the development of this rules, and even prior to the rules development in the language that would have become legislative language were their legislative language to be had this session. And so the rules that we are presenting to you are rules that we feel definitely have the buy-in and sign off and support of the tribes to which these dollars will ultimately be directed by the commission as really as stewards of those funds on behalf of the tribes.
Thank you. Commissioner Goulart?
Oh, thank you, Chair Cross. I've got a question for you. Can you hear me okay? Yep, okay. So 3 questions, and if you've covered them, I apologize, and maybe they're minute, but they're important for our applicants. One is on your fact sheet here under eligibility, working towards earning first associate's, bachelor's, or master. So if they already have an associate's, this grant under consideration would help pay or would pay for a going forward further to a bachelor's, is that correct? And then same thing, if they already have a bachelor's, it would pay for going forwards toward a master's?
Yes, Mr. Goya, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
That's good. Second question is right below that, priority consideration for applications received by August 1. So August 1 is a hoped for deadline, a firm deadline, but there is possibilities that things get dropped accidentally, that sometime in August or even September. I know most of the Oregon public schools anyway are on the quarter system, which starts around September 20th. So September is getting kind of late, but you could, through this grant, be considered if the application comes in after August 1?
Yes, Commissioner, that is correct. Again, the provisions and the rules allows the institutions to make a late disbursement in those cases.
The institutions, so the grant, and how do the mechanics of the grant, it would come from the HECC directly to the institution or to this, and then the institution then applies that to that student's registration?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And then last question, file a Fafsa or ORSA. What are those deadlines for those? I mean, here we are, April 14th. We're getting close to what used to be a March deadline. What is the new or current deadline of Fafsa and ORSA applications? Kyle or either, or someone from OSAC?
Sure, I do not have that information handy at this time. I will be able to provide that information as soon as possible.
Okay, because that's an important piece. If you haven't filed your FAFSA on time, then you're out of luck for 22 to 23 year, and this is what it's for. And here we are approving rules, hopefully today, that we want them to be eligible to do that. Does anyone know?
Commissioner Goulart, I believe the FAFSA deadline is June 30th.
June 30? Okay, and ORSA probably similar then? Okay,
You would think I would have that on the top of my head, but I don't.
That's okay. You have everything on top of your head, Kyle. I'm surprised.
Thank you. Commissioner Rowan and Commissioner Bell.
Thank you. On the last piece of the explanation where the award is reduced by the amount of any other aid, am I understanding correctly that this is last dollar aid then, and is it required that all potential other aid be applied for prior to this being awarded? Or is this first dollar aid?
So if it would be last dollar after all other applicable aid is applied toward that cost of attendance. Normally under our other grant programs, we are looking at specifically tuition only, but we are actually looking at the cost of attendance. So any specific aid, Pell Grants, Oregon Opportunity, Oregon Promise, those SEOG would be applied, and then any remaining balance of that calculated average cost of attendance will be paid to the institution towards.
Commissioner Rowe, that excludes loan aid that is extended. We are not requiring students to take either subsidized or unsubsidized Stafford loans, for instance, before the state would disperse. But yes, they would be required to take any other grant aid, excluding the aid that is offered directly to the student by the tribe in which they are enrolled.
Thank you. That was the staffers question, was my follow-up. Also, though, I wanted to make sure that there is help for the students in realizing what aid is available outside of this and applying for it and gaining access to it. is it assumed that once they file the FAFSA, they will be able to, and that it will come to them, or is there provision for counseling for them, financial aid counseling for them? Make sure that's done properly.
I'm sorry, I had a little difficulty hearing because of the echo in the room, but your question was, I caught the end of it, where they would be obtaining financial aid counseling with the board.
Correct. Just for purposes of the award and of associated dollars that might be available to them.
So I'll take a stab at that, Commissioner Rowe. So there are, I mean, so first, there's no legislation here, and so there's the dollars that we have been awarded are basically exclusively for disbursement to students, and so there is not on top of that created any additional structures that would provide for mandatory or supplementary counseling for this specific category of students that would somehow be different than that which is available for any other student who receives financial aid but doesn't qualify for this particular program. Of course, when students apply and work with the colleges and universities and work with our office, information and counseling can be available to them, but there's no explicit provisions here for bolstering that, which of course I think we recognize is a current need, a pressing need, and an ongoing need, but one which is not exclusively addressed.
Commissioner Dillon.
Maybe just, thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe just a point of clarification here. Since this is a broad grant in terms of the authority to extend these funds, but it actually lacks the underlying legislative language to identify that criteria. Are we comfortable that, given that these grants were produced by federal and state grants that meet certain criteria, that we can require students to go through the FAFSA process?
I think there may be, were you able to hear the question, Kyle?
I don't think well enough, and certainly I did not hear the preface to the question.
Okay, I'll repeat. Given that my understanding from what you stated, this is a broad grant of authority to extend these funds, that there is not a great deal of detail in terms of legislative language controlling the use of these funds. And given that these grants would be reduced by federal grants, state grants, are we able to require the students to go through the FAFSA process to see that what they first might qualify for in federal grants and state grants?
So I think I caught the question, Commissioner Devlin. Yes, we are very much requiring students to go through the current financial aid process. So they do have to file for some financial aid application, the FAFSA or the ORSA, as the case may be, as a condition of eligibility for the program. And while I would say that there's obviously no formal legislative language establishing legislative intent, I think that the parameters of the program that we're talking with you about today are, at least among certain key legislators, the folks on the budget committees and with leadership, the program parameters have been, I think, pretty well socialized by us in the governor's office.
And if I may add on to that, and Commissioner Devlin would be happy to follow up on this, but this rule, like others that are presented to the commission, has been reviewed by our legal counsel at the Department of Justice to ensure that it is appropriate and legal under the law, in this case, in the absence of law, but nevertheless a legislative intent and budget for the program.
Thank you. Go ahead, Scott.
I was just about to add, even though there's no sort of explicit programmatic authorization, we have plenty of other sufficient financial aid authorization under current existing statute to basically do what we're doing here, which is to create a program out of whole cloth.
Thank you. Commissioner Cipelli, I got some information for us.
So I just had a comment or a concern, but then also a question. I guess like from the student standpoint, I see so many great programs be passed, help bring students to higher education, but then they end within 1 to 2 years. But then for a lot of folks who are on a pre-professional track who want to go to grad school, it's like their freshman, sophomore year, they get the support, but their junior and senior year, that's when they need it most, especially when they transition into like a higher, into higher education, if that makes sense. And so I guess that's just like a concern of mine because that's something that I see happen to like a lot of students. And then by their junior or senior year, they end up dropping out because from what I've seen, programs don't get increases, they actually get decreases in funding. I'm optimistic about this one, but then, I'm just want to be safe. And then I had a question about for students who aren't, it's not that they're not eligible for FAFSA, but then let's say they had like a bad term or they're on academic probation, can they still apply to this grant even though they have like that status preventing them from doing so or no?
I'll take a shot at the first one and I'll turn it to Bob for the second one. That you have identified a flaw in a lot of what happens with regards to state budgeting and how it impacts our ability to extend aid. I would note that the rules you're considering prioritize renewal applications first. So in the unfortunate event that the legislature does not provide funding at a level adequate to support every application that we receive, we will first award to the students that are already in school. I think the greater in that circumstance, the greater harm is probably discontinuing the significant subsidy to a student who is partway through their studies, and the rule recognizes that.
Yeah, and I can address the second part of your question on students that get into that situation where they fall below their satisfactory academic progress or below that GPA level. Title IV regulations do allow the institutions to set up different programs, either some of the terminology is a probationary period or a academic plan where the students may have to go through at least one term, one quarter term, a semester term, whichever institution, without financial aid. And if they meet these requirements set up by the school, they will be able to continue on with any kind of funding. Some schools, if they do have again, a probationary period where they are showing academic progress, and then they are also eligible for Title IV funding, that would make them eligible for this program as well. So it boils down to the institutions and how they implement the federal regulations on Title IV funding. It's a broad area, and again, it boils down to the institutions on that. I hope that made sense.
Thank you. I understand Commissioner Stone also looked up the date for the FAFSA is June 1st. Is that correct? Commissioner Lujan Valerio, your hand up.
Thank you, Chair Cross. My question was kind of somewhat asked already and somewhat answered, but I kind of want to just dive a little bit deeper on the kind of technical assistance for students applying to these. The more that we increase accessibility, we're also increasing the capacity need for people to search for these opportunities, apply for these opportunities, and oftentimes it can be very, very much a difficult process to go through. And so I guess for me, I'd be interested to see how the HECC in general is thinking about that that technical assistance component to students, whether it's working closely with tribes, working closely with K through 12, working closely with the school entities at a lower level than higher ed, to make sure that students are not just aware of the opportunity, but also have the technical assistance to apply for it. And then I'm also thinking, and this may be a very broad question, is the HECC thinking about or considering that when students apply for the ORSA, and we have other grant opportunities that based on that ORSA, they check a box or what have you, it pings the system, right? Like this student might be eligible for this, that it automatically either already enrolls them into that program or notifies them that they may have the opportunity to apply to this program. Is that software capability already existing or in the works, or is there a conversation about it? Just want to see if that's already happening.
Commissioner Lujan Valerio, again take a stab at the first part and see if Bob has an answer on the second part. You've given me a perfect opportunity to revise and extend what I said prior about assistance. Lindsay Capps is messaging me and wants to make sure that I mention that in addition to the sort of financial aid assistance that's available through HECC and available through the institutions when students are exploring their options for affording college. In this particular instance, the education departments of the tribes have committed to working with their students directly, not only to market this program, and certainly we expect they will market this program to their students. It's a tremendous opportunity, but also in providing the kind of assistance that would be required to ensure that their students are fully availing themselves of the opportunity that is presented.
Can we go to Juan Visorla? Juan, will you introduce yourself and
Yes, good morning, commissioners. For the record, my name is Juan Paez Cerevelo. I'm the director of the Office of Student Access and Completion, better known as OSAC. And I'm so excited to hear all your questions that you're bringing up about this wonderful new program. Certainly, our team has been working diligently in collaboration with the tribes and getting their counsel, their guidance as we structure the rules that are in front of you. And this is work in progress. I think the questions that Commissioner Lujan Valerio has been bringing forward is right on in terms of the work that we need to do to engage the student population that should be aware of this new opportunity. The awareness is being raised right now. That is happening, that is coming. We're working closely with the tribal representatives on that. And I think it's twofold. You have students who are tribal members today that might be in post-secondary education, whether it's inside the state or outside the state, that could benefit from this. And so we're, getting that communication out to them directly through their tribal representatives is going to be very important. Also in the K-12 community, the universities are very eager to get everything going. Our team is working to have the application itself, the electronic application itself, be published and ready within a few days, hopefully not more than 2 weeks. The law just passed, so imagine that. And we've been working on getting an application set up, all the systems and structures set up. As Kyle mentioned, we have to go in front of the e-board to secure the authority to spend the monies that have been allocated, which is another hurdle. So whatever boulder gets in our way, we're just going to work diligently with our partners to remove it, because this is a systemic transformation and a very impactful program that we get the honor and the privilege to work on. And I know there was a question earlier in regards to a Fafsa filing deadline. I think historically, the reference that you may have is pertaining to the opportunity grant, where in previous years when money was super tight, that we would have to set a deadline very early, sometimes as early as March or even earlier than March. The first one that I can see on record was somewhere around February. We don't have such a deadline in place yet for the Oregon Opportunity Grant. That's the one program that we would require it traditionally, that students would have to have it. Other programs like Promise have a deadline. And for Oregon Promise, the deadline that Kyle mentioned is June 1st for students to have their application, in place for us to consider. For this one, in early August, we're looking at students who may start in the fall. Certainly, we are going to be processing, and we got a very strong direction, I would say, from the governor herself to get this application up and running at the earliest point possible. So start processing those applications, even at a point before the e-board authorizes us to spend a penny. And we're delighted to follow her orders, and we're working on that. So we're hopeful that we get many applications early and then we start processing them early, because the institutions will have to work with the students to walk them through their financial aid award. And for those that have been in our system it is going to be a tremendously radical change in their financial aid letter comparison to prior years because of this new grant. So it is very transformative. I trust that our university and college partners, both public and private in the state, will be helping and guiding the students in this good news and the good information. Word's getting out. I think just a day or two after the bill passed, and this is what is in legislative terms, and Commissioner Luján Valerio, and you know this well, is called the Christmas tree bill, even though it was well past Christmas. It was just a subsection of the many hundreds of pages. And we had a reporter out of the Bend Lapine area asking about it. How did that reporter learn about it? Through the OSU Cascade staff, who was so excited about getting the word out to students. So just the fact that it was passed, it was already making news. So we're looking forward to see this develop, see it grow, give you updates as we implement. And we may have some changes even as of today or tomorrow, where the web page that's being created, the details start coming up and being published. So we'll stay tuned, and please send us any questions, and I'll be glad to answer any more questions you may have.
Thank you. Commissioner Matias, we'll take your question, and then I think we should move on to action, and we have another rule to consider.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for all of your work on this. If I can say reparations are exciting, then I'll use that term, but I think they're absolutely necessary. I hope this is our first step in securing a lifetime funding, freedom funding. My question is, I hope, really simple, and it's just around the goal of this grant. Is this grant supposed to defray the full cost of the COA, or is it most of it? And the reason why I ask is we still have the funding and achievement subcommittee yesterday, where we talked about differential tuition. And so if this is a grant that is based on the average cost of attendance, not the full cost of attendance, to what's going to happen to students who might be in a program where they're seeing a differential tuition of anywhere from 10 to 37% above the average cost.
Okay, if I understand, Commissioner, if I understand the question correctly, is whether or not the intent is to cover the full cost of attendance at the institution, and the short answer is yes. We're going to have the awards be based on the full cost of attendance at the institution that the student is enrolling in. We have some differences between institutions, whether it's a community college or a public university. If the student is attending a private nonprofit institution, then the student will be eligible to receive up to the highest cost of attendance at a public university. So that's how we set that rate. It's a very similar in scope to how we approach, for example, the Oregon Opportunity Grant, where a student at a public nonprofit institution receives the award amount that a student at a public four-year institution receives.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'll call for a motion.
I move for approval for funding to the administration of the Oregon Travel Student Grant.
Was that Commissioner Luján Valorio's second?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Just a quick time check, and first of all, congratulations, commissioners. This is a great action. Before we move on, time check. We're scheduled to break in 5 minutes for lunch. So this is probably for Kyle and Bob. Can we cover the Oregon Promise rule quickly and move to adoption by 11:30? Bob's nodding. All right. Let's do it.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you again, Commissioner. Chair Cross and Commissioners, Bob Small, OSAC as official, and going over quickly on docket item 12.1. Kyle had pretty much gave a great overview of the rule changes. I will add one additional change, which is basically cleanup language from the FAFSA Simplification Act, and that is removing the selective service registration requirement for the Oregon Promise Grant. Other than that, everything else Kyle covered pretty extensively during his legislative overview. With that, we would like to recommend approval of the temporary rules if there are no questions.
Any questions? Do I hear a motion? No. It's been moved by Commissioner Devlin. Second. Second by Commissioner Matias. Yeah. Okay. Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you so much. So I think we are at our lunch break, and so we have at our panel on Native American perspectives on higher education will begin at 11:50. So we have about almost 25 minutes for lunch. So we'll see everyone back here at 11:50.
See y'all soon.
Thank you.
Commissioners, there is lunch for you.